Um, your second poem that you submitted, and I told you earlier before we started recording that I probably won't be able to talk about this a whole lot. This one really resonated with me because it hit me in a time where I have felt the most vulnerable in my life. And, you know, isn't that what we want to do with our writing is resonate, you know, hit people where they feel it. The river hit me right where right where it needed to. Talk to me about that. What is the river for you?
The river is basically right now is the flow of my life up until this point. I've had hit so many low points where most normal people would have given up and just done something else. And I'm really stubborn. I discovered that, especially over the last couple of years. Um, I was bullied through middle school, and at no point did I say, well, you know, I don't want to go to the school anymore because they bully me there. I found ways to work around it and to avoid the things that put me in the spot where I would end up getting bullied. And when all that failed, I found somebody who would help me, because a lot of the times is kids feeling not feeling able to go out, reach out and get that help. And from the time I started in middle school, I always had a someone who would support me as an immigrant, first time in an American schooling system, and that was different and interesting to me. So it was a whole part of the culture shock, and my accent was really strong, and that's where most of the bullying came from. So unfortunately, for part of that time, I just didn't talk to anybody. And then I got to high school and I just thought, well, middle school was so bad, it must be the same thing. So I stepped back and I was quiet for the first 3 weeks. And, most people just thought I just didn't talk or wasn't able to, because I was rarely ever picked on to answer a question in class or anything like that. And finally, I would think it was an English class or something, and a question was asked, and I raised my hand to answer. It's like I volunteered. I put myself in that spot, and I answered. And after class, somebody came up to me like, "Oh my gosh, I just thought you were mute." I'm like, "I know. What'd you think? Would you look at that? But no, I can talk. That's fine." And I realized that even though my friend circle did not grow exponentially in high school, I was never picked on. I was never bullied because the culture was different in high school. There were other Jamaicans there. There were Haitians. It was very, very diverse for my high school. So nobody had any of those little racial issues. Like, there were just as many Blacks as there were whites. There were Asians, Hispanics. It was just everybody was there, and nobody ever said, well, I don't want you sitting with me because you're Asian. But it was like all of these things building up. And the most recent, 2 years ago, so right before I moved to Miles City, I ended up getting a divorce. And that had probably been one of my lowest points. And I don't even know if this is something you would say. I'd always ask the question, what is the thing in a person's mind that says, I can't move forward from here. This hurts too much. I will end it. And I've always said, I would say sometimes, some people are selfish. It's not the same for everybody. So I can't say that for everyone. But it's the people who had other ways and, could possibly reach out for it. But I can't judge on that because you never know what's going on in someone's head. But for me, in that moment, I thought to myself, I won't hurt myself because I have other people to think about. But that pain I felt in that moment, it gave me a level of understanding of how somebody could decide, this is the point where I'm done. because it just seems so unbearable. Like picking up my feet to move forward was such a journey that I honestly, sometimes I don't know how I made it out of it. But I kept thinking, I have my kids to live for, and I have to give them an example for them to follow. I have to leave footsteps for them to follow behind me. And at the time, I was working on my bachelor's at Arizona State, and it was all online. And I kept going. And when I got here in Miles City, I had little under a year left. And in December of 2019, I flew to Arizona and I walked across the stage as the first of my five siblings and first of my generation out of my grandmother's grandkids to graduate from college with a bachelor's degree. And then from there, I'm like, all right, I made it this far. How can I keep moving forward? Because my kids are watching and they need to know that if you put your mind to something, you might not achieve exactly what you're going for, but you'll get somewhere. You don't want to stay in the same spot. So every time I've thought I've hit rock bottom, I always find a way back up, because you can't go any lower than that. You can only go up. So as long as you don't give up the hope that you have somewhere to get to and someone who has their eyes on you, who depend on you to keep moving forward, you can keep moving forward. And that was the whole logic behind the river, because, you know, it's more than just a flow of time for me. It's just time in general. There will always be crossroads. There will be streams that branch off from the main river, and it will take you elsewhere, but it always runs back to the ocean. And you always end up in that same puddles. Like, it depends on how far you want to go as a person. Do you want to stay in that spot or keep moving forward? That was the inspiration for the river.
That is beautiful. That is about as beautiful as the poem itself. Um, your children are watching. That's I told my kids a couple months ago, you're going to watch me go through the toughest year you have ever seen, and you're going to watch me thrive, and you're going to watch me cry a lot, and you're going to watch me struggle, and you're going to watch me get mad and angry, and I'm going to storm out, and I'm going to hug, and I'm going to come to you and lean on you, and I'm going to thrive. We're going to get through this. And that's important. That's it. We all have our lows. We all struggle. We all face adversity. And I've always said that, you know, how we handle adversity defines us as human. And our own path through adversity is different than what somebody else would do. And so, you know, when you say you might not be one to understand why somebody would give up, but you've been low enough to understand how somebody could be there. I've always disliked the selfishness behind suicide. I've always disliked that the idea, I should say, the idea that people say suicide is selfish. It's a pain that I don't think anybody understands unless they've actually been there, or they've been there with somebody they love and watched them go through it. And it's, you know, it's no different than our previous conversation about social justice and eye-opening experiences of diversity in our world, and encompassing, you know, humanity as one instead of in individualized groups. Um, it's a conversation. Mental health is a conversation we're finally starting to take seriously after, you know, generations and generations of losing people. We're finally, you know, maybe because pandemic, maybe because I don't know. I don't know why, but we are finally starting to take this seriously. I know suicide rates are have drastically increased over the last 16 months or so since the world closed. And it's horrific. But I know 5 people in my world who I've lost before 2020. So it's not new by any means. Um, and heartache is divorce or losing somebody you love, even if it's through death, through suicide. Heartache is one of those things that you have to love yourself through, and you have to see yourself, through those most difficult moments, or you don't come out on the other side. You drown in your own emotions and you get sucked down into that current. This was a powerful piece too. I mean, I've already said it. Your pieces were my absolute favorites in the poetry. And this is one everyone needs to read as well. I was looking at it real quick to see if I had a line. I was like, put this on a poster, but the whole thing is good.
Yeah, when I wrote this, it was actually during the middle of the pandemic, but I never really had a time where, there were people who were either stuck at home or they were cut off from loved ones. I work full time right now as as registration staff in a hospital here in Miles City, and you got to see the different sides of people. You got to see the fear because we were probably one of the last towns hit, because when everybody was shut down, we had maybe 2 cases in Miles City because we were so cut off from everywhere else. And when it finally caught, it kind of just spread like a wildfire. And you got to see the fear and the sadness. And when people were cut off from other family members in the nursing homes, it was sad and it was depressing. But while I'm doing this whole thing, I'm still working full time. My kids still had to go to daycare. I was actually in the middle of doing my online master's degree through Full Sail University, which I graduated in December. And everybody kept asking, like, how do you do it? Like, how do you pull all that off, working full time as a single parent, going to school full time? Because none of the courses were ever, well, I'll take 2 here, 3 there, and just adds up. I was in school straight through. So the entire pandemic, I was always going. There was always something. But it was one of those things where you didn't have the time to stop and wallow in your own self-pity, because they had the whole thing where it's like, I can't, stay home. I'm a healthcare worker. And that was one of the things that were true for me, because there were days I had to volunteer my time. I had days where I was at work like 5, 6, 7 days in a row, and I worked 10-hour days. And it's not an easy thing to do. So not only was I sacrificing time with my kids and cramping down the time I have to work on my education, I was also making sure I was out there helping patients who were coming into the hospital, who were sick and in need of help and needed that extra comfort, or just needed 5 minutes of someone to listen to them because they couldn't go anywhere else to talk to anyone else. And all of that stuff factors into how your mental health develops, because there you can see where some people learned from the isolation. You can see where some people suffered. And for me, I kind of grew, because from helping other people, I was able to find a way to help myself, because just listening to them, you also get the understanding, you're not the only one feeling things, and you don't always know what someone else is experiencing. Sometimes all you can offer is that shoulder for them to lean on, cry on, do whatever. And I think the pandemic, for some people, it made a lot of people better. It opened their eyes to certain things, and it just made some things easier, some things are harder. You just have to figure out what you learned from it and how you take that to move forward.
Everything you say is powerful. Every time you stop talking, I think, wow, that's really powerful.
Don't ask me to say it again later though, because I will never remember it.
You say again. Um, yeah, it's been a tough year for everyone. In your small town, 5,000 6,000 people, how hard were you eventually hit?
Um, at one point we were having, because so the hospital I work at is the main hospital for, I think it's probably like 3 or 4 counties, because otherwise you would have to drive hours away to the next one. And most people, there are people who would drive anywhere from 4 hours or more to get to our hospital there, because it's one of the closest healthcare facilities they have that can provide the type of healthcare they need. So there were times when we were having patients, we had like 16 positives in a day or something like that. And it just kept growing. And then it would start from one person, it just snowballed and it just got so crazy. Everything was, they closed down bars and restaurants, but obviously, food for grocery stores and stuff like that were open. They had to implement safety measures so that, people could actually get the things they needed. But it was still sort of like a ghost town, because you can't invite anybody over for dinner, because then they start asking you 10,000 questions like, has anybody in your family had a cough? Do you have a fever? I'm like, you shouldn't have to interview someone to go to dinner.
Right.
And it was so different. It just made a small town seem so much smaller because everybody was isolated, and it was just different. My sister and I, we work in the same hospital, so we never really felt that isolation, because we worked with each other. We had each other, our kids go to school together. So whenever we had to go to work, all our kids were together in the same place. So it's kind of hard to stay away from each other. And then we were also at work where we got to see people every day, and we had to have actual conversations with people. So we never got that true sense of isolation that some people felt. And I think that's what made it easier for some of us, but there are other people who had it far worse.